Hello class, today we're going to be learning about fables and trickster tales. Before we get into the lesson, we're first going to go over what their objectives are, and as you can see there's three of them. First, the students will be able to recall the main events in the fable and state what the moral was. Next, the students will be able to discuss how they can apply the lesson learned from the moral in their own lives. And finally, the students will be able to create a Powtoon about two fables of their choice. So first we'll go over some basic information about fables and trickster tales. Fables and trickster tales are both types of stories. Both types of stories teach lessons, or morals, about how people behave. These stories are told by elders who share them in order to pass down the lessons from one generation to the next. So next we'll get into some similarities and differences between the two. Now both types of stories often use animals with human features to help examine human behavior. Trickster tales tell stories about a character who plays tricks on people or breaks the rules to get what they want. The trickster is sometimes a god or spirit and may sometimes be foolish or funny. Fables usually describe the lesson learned at the end, while trickster tales often celebrate the little creature having triumphed over the bigger one at the end of the story. Since both types of stories are told many times over the years, sometimes details get changed over time. There are multiple versions of many fables and trickster tales that are basically the same story, but have minor differences. Now we're going to learn about a trickster tale about a character called Anansi. Many trickster tales come from Ghana, which is a country in Africa. These stories often tell stories about Anansi, who is a god that often takes the form of a spider. The tale we're going to look at is called Anansi Tries to Steal All the Wisdom in the World. So let's watch.
Hey, this is Nick Cannon, and I'll be reading Anansi Tries to Steal All the Wisdom of the World. Anansi, which means spider in the African language of Akan, prided himself on being clever, but knew that he was not very wise. So one day he came up with the clever idea to become wise easily. He picked up a hollow gourd and thought to himself, if I fill this gourd with wisdom, then I can keep it all to myself, and I'll be wiser than anyone in the world. Excited about his new scheme, he went from door to door asking for advice and wisdom. He thought he was being clever by stealing everyone's wisdom, but everyone he met happily shared their advice with him, for they could see that Anansi needed wisdom more than anybody. Finally, when he had filled his gourd with all the advice, ideas, and wisdom he could carry, he scuttled back to his home excited. But then he had a thought. What if someone else comes and tries to steal all my wisdom? He decided that he would hide his wisdom in a safe place. So he saw a tall tree and figured that it would be a good hiding spot. He clutched the gourd close to his body with two of his legs and tried to use the other six to climb the tree. But the gourd was too big. Every time he went to try to climb the tree, the gourd got in his way. Just as he was growing frustrated, his young son came by and said, "Why don't you just tie the gourd to your back, Daddy?" His son's wise words made Anansi realize that wisdom was best used if shared with others. So he tied the gourd to his back, climbed up to the very top of the tree, and held the gourd up to the sky. All of the wisdom in the gourd spilled out into the wind and flew away, far and wide. And that is how wisdom came to the land. The end.
Okay, so reviewing that story a little more, the moral that it is telling us is that wisdom is best used when it's shared with others, as I said at the end. Now, in this version of the story, Anansi is very happy to share his wisdom with the world. But as I said in the previous slide, sometimes in different versions of the story, you'll hear things a little differently. And there are some versions of the story where Anansi is upset and angry about having to share his wisdom. So it just depends which one that you hear. Although I think I like this one better, where he's happy to share the knowledge. So now we're going to look at a different type of story, and this is a fable, The Hare and the Tortoise. So this is a fable that you might know. Now, although I'm calling it The Hare and the Tortoise, the names of animals are often switched in the title these days, and you might have heard of it as The Tortoise and the Hare. Either way, it's the same story. So take a look and see if you recognize it.
Okay, class, who would like to do problem 3 on the board? There once was a hare who was always boasting about how fast he was. He never got tired of telling the other animals how fast he was and how slow they were. The hare was especially boastful when talking to the tortoise. "What a slow fellow you are," he said to the tortoise one day. "I really feel sorry for you, having to creep along like that. Creep, creep, creep. It must take you all afternoon just to cross the field." The tortoise was not amused. "You may be fast," said the tortoise, "but I'll bet I could beat you in a race." "Ha ha ha!" The hare laughed. "That's hilarious. You must be joking. A race between you and me wouldn't even be close." The tortoise replied, "Well then, let's try. Suppose we race to the foot of the mountain." "Sure thing," said the hare. The other animals gathered around to watch the race. "Ready?" said the squirrel. "Set," said the mouse. "Go!" said the raccoon. The hare darted off quickly and ran so far ahead that he was almost out of sight. The tortoise set off too, moving slowly but steadily. After he had gone about halfway to the mountainside, the hare looked back. He saw that the tortoise was far behind, so far behind it seemed as if he could never catch up. "This is not much of a race," sniffed the hare. Since it seemed to him that the race was already won, the hare decided to stop and take a little break. He nibbled some carrots and some lettuce. He chatted with some friends. All this while, the tortoise kept moving, slowly but steadily. The hare looked back again and saw that he was still way out ahead. So he lay down in a pumpkin patch, closed his eyes, and pretended he was sleeping. He didn't really mean to go to sleep. He just wanted to show the tortoise that he could take a little nap and still win the race. But it was a warm day, and it wasn't long before the hare began to feel sleepy. Eventually, he nodded off and began to snore. While the hare was napping, the tortoise kept moving, slowly but steadily. After 15 minutes, he crawled past the sleeping hare. After another 15 minutes, he was within a few feet of the finish line. That was when the hare woke up from his nap. He realized what had happened and set off running for the mountain as fast as he could. But it was too late. The hare arrived just in time to see the tortoise crossing the finish line before him. So, the moral of the story is, slow and steady wins the race.
Okay, so, like I said, you might have recognized that story, maybe not, but in case you haven't heard this before and haven't heard the moral, let's discuss it. And there's actually 2 morals that can be associated with this story. First one, as you'll see there in the end, is slow and steady wins the race. Although this is the moral most often associated with it, another moral that you can associate with the story of the hare and the tortoise, or the tortoise and the hare, is that you shouldn't be arrogant. So now that we've looked at an example of a trickster tale and a fable and discussed these a little bit, let's go over the project that you're going to be doing on this topic. So many of the fables that we know today are credited to an author named Aesop and are part of the collection of stories known as Aesop's Fables. This website here, www.aesopfables.com, has hundreds of fables by Aesop as well as other authors. For your project, you're going to focus on fables, and you're going to choose 2 fables from the website above and make a Powtoon about them. I made a Powtoon for you as an example, which has all the directions for you. Okay, so there's the information for your project. I hope you have fun exploring the fables and making your videos, and I can't wait to see them.